Well, let's look a little closer at that debate that's underway in the United States, and I'm joined by Nick Sharman from the University of Melbourne. He's a lecturer in media and society and specialises in teaching American politics. Nick Sharman, thanks very much for coming in and talking to us. These comments by Barack Obama are an interesting development because the issue of gun control is a particularly fraught one in US politics, isn't it?
It certainly is, Nick, yeah. So, I think it's interesting that on one hand, President Obama needs to appear presidential. As we heard on the news story, there's police chiefs, there's Mayor Bloomberg in New York, for example, has called on President Obama to actually come out with some response to the tragedy in Colorado. And so he needs to sort of be seen to be doing something. But on the other hand, and I think it's interesting since he made those comments at the speech to the National Urban League, he's sort of already through his press secretary backtracking a bit and saying, well, I'm not actually looking at changes in existing legislation. I'm not sort of going down that path at this stage. The Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid, has said there's not room on the legislative agenda for gun control. So I think there's already been some attempt to sort of backtrack from that because of the fear of the NRA as the third major party in American politics.
Well, do you think Mr Obama, in that sense, was playing to his congregation, or was he allowing his own personal beliefs to creep through in a debate which may actually have adverse political consequences for him?
I think maybe. You remember he was speaking to the National Urban League, who's a civil rights organisation who supports gun control. And President Obama, when he first ran for office back in 1999, he was very vocal in arguing for gun control, in sort of regulations and restrictions on assault weapons, as well as other restrictions. So he's had that sort of in his statement, and his statements about sort of AK-47s belong in the hands of soldiers rather than criminals was very reminiscent of earlier statements he's made. But he's really backtracked from that, and when he's got to sort of be president, he really hasn't sort of done terribly much to try and put forward that sort of policy. And even though, as you say, maybe it's going back to some of his ongoing beliefs, I'm not convinced that he will actually follow through in any significant way once the furore sort of surrounding this whole issue dies down.
Well, of course, the attitude of many Americans could probably have been summed up by the survivor who told the ABC this week that he just wished he'd been carrying his own handgun at the time so that he could have shot back at the gunman.
That's right. Well, I know they're talking about 40% increase in sort of gun sales in Colorado, and the sense that if you have your civil liberties to own a gun, then you can sort of somehow shoot back, and that won't lead to sort of a gunfight which will kill even more people. It seems, I suppose, after our own experience with Martin Bryant and the Port Arthur massacre and the sort of changes in gun laws and the actual buying back of guns, we took a very different approach, and I must say I don't sort of see the idea of having everybody sort of having a gun sort of really as a realistic sort of solution to this particular tragedy.